Either we travel to the moon or we return. We should note that while getting their portion was long ago figured out, what is still unknown. Is there a possibility that we could stay there? If you take it into account, the solution becomes more logical. Why did humanity first stop going to the moon? We cannot continue wasting millions of dollars and repeatedly putting lives in danger only to go on day trips. If we apply the same equation to a long-term stay where we can really make the most of the trip, where we can stay long enough to learn something profound about the universe and life itself, something that we never could have discovered on Earth, the risk-to-reward ratio of a short-duration trip to the lunar surface is ideal. If we don't plan to construct something permanent there is really little purpose in going back, leaving us only with the dilemma of what to build. What will this infrastructure for a moon base do? How does it function? We're going to attempt to determine that today. Presented by AWZ. Let's start with two broad tactics that are now being used to build infrastructure on the moon. On the one hand, there is the Artemis project, which is being led by the United States and NASA and is supported by virtually every other space agency on the planet. The Artemis Accords, a very generic set of guidelines for how multinational initiatives will interact on the surface of the moon, were published by NASA in October 2020. The agreement's core tenets are to promote international standards for interoperability, strengthen peaceful ties between nations, and encourage transparency in planning and policy. The phrase protecting space heritage refers to the idea that the original NASA moon landing site, which is effectively the first space heritage site, cannot be compromised in any way. Finally, they concur that space resources must be shared, that national lunar activities must not negatively impact one another, and that the moon's environment should only be conserved through the proper disposal of spacecraft and other equipment. That's really cool, then. Starfleet-like kumbaya optimism permeates the situation, but there isn't much of a clear strategy for what they will accomplish or when they will do it. China and Russia are the only two significant parties seated on the other side of the table who have not ratified the Artemis Accords. In fact, I believe China was not even permitted to sign even if they wanted to. The Wolf Amendment is a law that was drafted in 2011 and forbids NASA from working with China without receiving special consent from Congress. Because they are Russia, they decided against joining the Artemis. In any case, both China and Russia have asserted that they intend to construct on the moon inside the next 5 years. The first lunar research outpost planned by the Chinese Space Agency is scheduled to launch in 2027 as part of the Chang'e 8's moon landing mission. This will take place before any Chinese or Russian astronauts visit the moon. Therefore, the outpost would be built utilizing robotics, which will be incredibly interesting to watch how it plays out, but as far as any details on how exactly that would look or function, we currently have nothing. To be fair to NASA, they truly are just laser focused on getting people there and back safely, which is more than enough to worry about, so they haven't disclosed any details about what they could develop on the moon. However, SpaceX has suggested several possibilities for how humans might use its spacecraft as a more long-term structure. Accordingly, the spacecraft is now solely being used for the human landing system, given the plan. This serves as a shuttle between lunar orbit and the surface of the moon. The Orion spacecraft is in charge of transporting passengers back to Earth. Therefore, once the lunar spacecraft has completed its task, it can either continue to orbit the moon or make one more descent to the surface and remain there. In addition, if a SpaceX Starship is on the moon's surface, it will effectively be a 9-meter steel tube that has already been designed to support human life and serve as the base of operations for 2 astronauts on their week-long Artemis 3 moon trip. The SpaceX strategy is really straightforward. We simply tip the spacecraft over, put it down on its side, and then cover it with regolith, the fancy name for all of the dust, rocks, and other materials that cover the moon's surface. Therefore, it would act as a low mound to shield the spacecraft from space hazards like as magnetic storms, solar flares, and radiation from micrometeorites. That the atmosphere of the moon is insufficient to protect us from the airlock. The starship's nose cone would function as a large round front door, while the rest would essentially just resemble a hill with a hobbit hole dug into it. We're going to dig hobbit holes on the moon, really? There are a few elements of the Artemis Accords that have real substance, even though the most of them are essentially airy unity rhetoric. The ability to collect and use resources from the moon, Mars, and asteroids will be essential to ensure safe and sustainable space exploration and development, according to one of those listed under this subject under the heading Space Resources. The Artemis agreements reaffirm that the extraction and use of space resources can and will be done so in accordance with the terms of the Outer Space Treaty, with a focus on Articles 2, 6, and 11. Now that we know where this is mentioned in the Space Treaty, let's move on. If you didn't know, this is a document created by the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. The moon and other celestial bodies are not subject to national appropriation through a claim of sovereignty, by use or occupation, or through any other means, according to Article 2 of this treaty. I believe the author is trying to suggest that no country on Earth can legitimately claim to have set foot on the moon. We couldn't just show up, plant a flag, and declare that this is now Canada's moon. Next, according to Article 6 of the treaty, whether they are conducted by governmental or non-governmental organizations, national operations in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, are the responsibility of the states party to the treaty. The activities of non-governmental entities in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall require authorization and ongoing supervision by the relevant state party to the treaty in order to ensure that national activities are carried out in compliance with the provisions set forth in the present treaty. There are a few intriguing issues in there. It basically says that whatever a country or its officials conduct on the moon, they may still be held accountable for it on Earth. And second, NASA must grant authorization and oversight for any non-governmental organization, such as SpaceX, to conduct any activities on the moon. In order to encourage global collaboration in the peaceful exploration and use of space, Article 11 states, states parties to the treaty who conduct activities in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, agree to notify the UN Secretary-General, the general public, and the international scientific community of the nature, locations, and outcomes of such activities to the greatest extent feasible and practicable. I believe this statement means that if you find anything strange in space, such as alien evidence for example, you have to inform the UN and the public about it. The Secretary-General of the United Nations should be ready to disseminate the information immediately and effectively upon receiving the said information. It should go without saying that returning a large amount of supplies from the moon to Earth will be quite helpful since, as far as we can determine, there is nothing particularly valuable there that isn't also available here. We would be looking at something else if rare earth metals were present on the moon's surface, but that is not the case. We know that there are craters on the moon where the bottoms lie in perpetual darkness, never touched by light from the sun, so the temperature never rises above 60 degrees Kelvin, which is negative 213 degrees Celsius. In-situ resources for moon-based operations using local resources to support moon-based infrastructure. These are also known as cold traps because substances like carbon dioxide, oxygen, hydrogen, and water that may have been carried by the asteroids that formed the craters will always remain in solid form and never escape as gas or vapor. The components for breathing air, liquid water, and even methane fuel are all very likely present on the moon in these cold traps. However, this has not yet been proved. Imagine what we could observe from an observatory on the other side of the moon if we constructed it at the bottom of one of these permanently shaded craters. This way, heat from the sun would never influence the instruments, which would always remain ice cold. It's widely acknowledged at this point that as the number of satellites, space stations, and other objects in low Earth orbit rises, and that number will rise by a lot very quickly, our ability to observe the universe through ground-based telescopes on Earth will become progressively more constrained. With all of these small rocket firms offering affordable and simple rides to Orbit Plus, including Firefly, Rocket Lab, and Virgin Orbit. Here's one more ridiculous notion. After all, we all understand how important an off-site backup is for data security. If your house burns down, it won't matter if you have your digital images stored on 3 different hard drives scattered across your home. Why couldn't we do the same thing with really essential items on Earth? If you want true security, you must perform an off-site backup. For added security, keep them off-site, literally off-planet. By crucial things, we mean the DNA that makes us human. Just in case, we could go back up the genetic code for crucial food crops and critical working animals like dogs, horses, and cows while we're at it. Even if we Earth-based humans can't survive our own cataclysm, and even if we don't get the chance to start over, maybe somebody else will come along at some point over the course of the next few billion years. We can record all of our mathematical formulas and scientific discoveries and stash them away somewhere safe under the surface of the moon. And perhaps those individuals, or whoever they may be, can at least get something from what we have accomplished. Please share your thoughts on sending people to the moon with us. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and tell your friends about it so we can make more like it. Click the subscribe button to see more content like this, and don't forget to activate the notification bell. Watch our other videos as well if you haven't already. Thank you for viewing.